My name is Scott Frack. I'm 38 years old, and my passion is racing. I was introduced to racing at a young age. My uncle raced actively when I was a kid. My grandfather raced back in the late 50s, early 60s. I don't remember exactly 100% when, but at just a certain point, I remember every Matchbox I had was a race car. My bike became a race car. Everything I did had to do with racing. Everything was about racing, and it's kind of been the same ever since. When I was younger and I first got into it, I liked racing mostly because it's cool. Fast cars and just I liked cars in general, and racing was just a way that you could drive them fast and stay out of trouble. As I got older, racing became more of the challenge of going faster every week. Even when you have a bad week, there's just something to look forward to next week. You destroy a car, it's like, all right, well, we were fast, we'll put it back together, and next week it'll be awesome. And that's kind of what I like about it. It just never seems to, just kind of always seems to excite me. I just always want to go faster, and I love the challenge. I started in go-karts in 1998. Did that for 2 years. A friend of mine was getting into modifieds. He had his first car, he ran one season, and from that point his car came up for sale, and I was talking to my uncle, and he said if I bought a car, he'd put a motor together for me. So that next day I went and bought that car, and my uncle put a motor together for me, and we started racing modifieds and just progressed from there. Started getting better motors and better cars, and just tried to do the best we could with what we could afford. Always wanted to race sprint cars. The 410s and the 360s were always out of budget. The 305 class was getting started in New Jersey, and it was right around the time my son was born, and the modifieds were a lot more maintenance, a lot more time consuming, and I thought it was a great jump off point to go try the sprint cars where it was a little less maintenance. So I thought, let's give it a shot, and that's kind of where we're at today, and just trying to see how far we can go from here, get into 410s, get back in the modifieds. It doesn't really matter to me, just as long as we're racing. We're even to the point now where my 7-year-old son is racing quarter midgets, and hoping to keep things going on through him. And one day, hopefully, he'll want to go and race sprint cars and race modifieds. The most testing obstacle facing racing is the financial aspect of it, and competing with guys who are more talented or just as talented, but just out money you, have bigger motors, have better cars, have fresher equipment. Help was always an issue too. There's always a challenge of getting people to help you at the racetrack and in the shop, but financial backing was always the biggest issue. My main support system is my wife Christina and my son Braden. They're there when the races go bad, they're there when the races go good, and they're behind me 100%, whether we're having a good season or a bad season. And I think when you're into something big, that's all the support you need. It's nice to be supported, and they let you go do what you want to do. And if things are going bad, you can get away from it. I keep racing just because I love it, and it's a great challenge. I think it's the one thing that can keep me sane, even when I have bad days and come home from work and work's crazy and people are driving you crazy, and you come home and you go in the shop, and I leave the shop and I have a hard time even leaving it. You don't want to go to bed, and it's just that's to me, that's just as therapeutic, and it's kind of almost like a meditation for me. Just come into the shop and work, and I just love it. A role model for me within racing, actually there would be 3 of them. My 3 role models would be my grandfather and my uncle. And they were the closest to me who I know raced. They were the ones in the shop with me pretty much from the beginning, helping me, trying to figure out after we put a motor together why it wouldn't run right, figuring out how to put cars together. They taught me how to get started. My third role model was Ed Toshman, and he owned the speed shop that I worked at. He was a family friend of ours, and he was in the racing, and he was currently in racing at the time when I was getting ready to race. So he was the model I had to get involved now. So I had a mix of the old and a mix of the new to get started. Butch Tittle was a guy who I learned a lot from. He was the first like big time modified driver that I knew. He won a ton of championships, and Ed was helping him out at the time, and started going to the races with Ed to whoever he was helping at the time. And those guys welcomed me onto their team and allowed me to come in and see what racing was about, and took me under his wing, and it was really a cool experience because he was in the same situation. He wasn't with a very well-funded team, and he did well with what he had, and I tried to use that going forward to help my team. And Butch had been that guy from then, and he's still that way. I think the future generations of the sport might actually bring us out of maybe some of the downturn that the sport overall has taken. And I mean that from at some of the higher levels. I feel like the levels of sprint cars and modifieds aren't in a bad spot, but I do believe that it's kind of turning more towards guys want to race. They don't want to do the NASCAR thing, and not knocking the NASCAR thing totally. I believe that the sport will be better with people who actually want to go race instead of just become famous. And I think this by looking at my son's quarter midget yearbook this year, and I looked at almost everybody's profile page, and at the bottom where it said, what do you want to race next? It said sprint cars and modifieds and USAC sprints, and that made me feel better about the progression of the sport. Advice I give to anybody that wants to start anything that they're passionate about is not to rip off a Nike line, is just go do it. Like, people are gonna tell you it's not gonna work. People are gonna tell you it's stupid. People are gonna tell you that, you're getting older and married now. Maybe you should just settle down and go do a job and just do what everybody else does. But the hell with that. Just go do what you wanna do and pursue it. And if it's something you like to do and it's doesn't harm anybody else, there's no reason you shouldn't do it. Just go do it.
My name is Blaike Bracelin. I'm 21, and my passion is racing. I met Scott Frack for the first time when my brother Blaine was racing at Big Diamond when I was 16 years old. And me and my friend Chaz were there, and Chaz's uncle, Rick Steef, was racing there with the 305s at the time, and he introduced me to Scott then. And then a couple months went by, and I wanted to get into the sprint cars more, and Rick didn't really need any help, and he kind of shoved me towards Scott, and me and Scott have been friends ever since. I got started in racing when I was 8 years old. My dad introduced me to quarter midgets. It was the first thing I drove. I raced for about 9 years, and it didn't really start clicking for me until I was around 15 or 16, and I started to learn more and become a lot more adept at what I was doing. And when I was 16, I went out to Indiana and ran at the Grand Nationals at Terre Haute, and I ran at Eldora as part of the Four Crown thing. They had a race at the old go-kart track for the quarter midgets. I ran there without my parents, without my brother, and I think that was the coolest thing I did within quarter midgets. And after that, I ran my brother's old modified as a sportsman. I ran a season at Bridgeport with the rookies, and my first race that I finished 11th. I thought that was pretty cool, but other than that, it's been around my whole life. My dad raced, and then when he stopped racing, when he had my brother, he would help out Keith Brightbill at Grandview, so it's just been around me my whole life. I've learned anything I could tell you that's about a sprint car, I learned from Scott Frack, and I've learned life lessons from Scott Frack because I've been able to talk to Scott like a friend and as a role model at the same time, which is kind of hard to have if it's not a parental figure. So there's a lot more free range to talk about certain things. He's taught me a lot with my own modified and just cars in general, but anything that has to do with an open wheel car, Scott has taught me. Scott has helped me grow within racing because he taught me how to keep a level head when things go wrong, because he's usually a pretty calm guy on and off the track, and when things go wrong, he tends to keep it to himself. He gets mad at himself. He doesn't get mad at the situation. He doesn't get mad at the other people. And he's also a pretty clean guy, which is nice. You know, he taught me how to be more organized when it comes to that kind of stuff. Scott's a good influence, I would say, to everybody that's around him all the time. You know, he's calm, he's level-headed, he's raising his kid to be a good kid. I think overall he presents himself in a good manner and just boosts up everybody around him. The kind of support that Scott provides when it comes to my racing has always been mental. You know, he gives me a good mindset of what to think. He's given me tips on tracks that he's raced at that are like the tracks I'm going to race at. I mean, when we go somewhere that Scott hasn't raced before, I bring up stuff that I've seen in my past, and when I find out that I'm going somewhere, Scott will give me tips for what he's seen there. The advice I would have for someone getting into their respective passion would be do whatever you want to do. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. Because if you're going to do it, you might as well just do it. Why beat around the bush for 30 years and then be pissed off that you didn't get the chance to do it? As long as you don't hurt anybody, why not?
Focus.
Scott is my best friend.
Good thing nobody takes me seriously.